The concept of risk and return is key to understanding the entire investment process. Investors wish to maximize their returns while minimizing risk. Asset classes are compared on the basis of their risk and their risk-return expectations. Hedging activities are conducted to reduce risk, while leveraging helps to increase risk. Everything investors do relates to risk and return. But what is risk? We'll look at investment risk, but let's take a step back first and just look at the general concept of risk. One, this is useful because I think everyone understands risk. From the time that we were young children touching the hot stove for the first time, all the way up to today. We face risk in our lives every day. But also, we need to look at risk in general because we do understand risk. And when we get to investment risk, we'll see that investing risk is a much different type of risk. So let's refresh first on risk in general before we head into investment risk. In this session, we'll look at risk in general, probably the way that you view risk. We'll cover the difference between fundamental and particular risk, dynamic versus static risk, and pure versus speculative risks. In general, risk is the future probability of harm, loss, or injury. The damage or the loss may be emotional, physical, or financial. Again, something we're all very familiar with. In the real world, that may be an auto accident, it may be death, it may be a hurricane disaster. Most of us get insurance to cover against these risks. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is when we apply risk to an individual person. Each person has a different concept of risk. One that's based on your personality, your financial situation, where you may live, the stage of life, and the unique experiences that you've gone through. Some people are risk takers. Others prefer a more stable and safe life, and they conduct their affairs accordingly. As well, over time and circumstances, perception of risk may change. For example, when you were young, carefree, there's probably little to no thought of death. But then you get married, buy a home, incur a large mortgage, have a child. Your views on death and insurance probably change. In my case, moving from Western Canada to the Caribbean, I developed a big interest in hurricanes and tropical storms. I was much less concerned with icy roads in the winter and freezing pipes. Same person, same situation financially and personality-wise, but circumstances had changed, and so too had my view of risk. If you look at your own life and your own friends and family, you'll see what I mean. Some people are more risk tolerant, others are more risk averse. And a lot depends on how they were raised, their own circumstances, how they've experienced loss in the past. All these things factor into the individual's perception of risk, and that will differ from risk as a whole. The first differentiation I want to make is between fundamental and particular risks. Fundamental risks are impersonal in nature. That is, they affect a large amount of people simultaneously. War, hurricanes, even economic issues like inflation. It's widespread, wide-reaching, impacts everyone more or less the same. On the other hand, you have particular risks. They're the result of individual events. So they're much narrower in scope. A house fire, a car theft, murder. Your house fire may impact your neighbors, it's not going to impact the entire city, unlike, say, a hurricane or a war. People protect themselves from risks through insurance. Some people through avoidance. For example, if you're scared of a hurricane, you probably don't want to go live in the Caribbean. If you're worried about sharks, you may not want to swim in the ocean. Other people try to reduce the risk, realizing that on a practical basis, maybe you can't avoid certain things. Driving a car, for example. So these people try to reduce their risk by only purchasing very highly rated, as far as safety goes, automobiles. They keep their vehicle up to date in maintenance. The tires are well taken care of. There's no issues with the interior. They drive the speed limit. They buckle up. Maybe even they prefer secondary highways over the main roads. They take steps to reduce the risk in areas that they cannot avoid. If we look at dynamic versus static risks, dynamic involve changes in the environment or the economy. They impact specific groups. For those who are impacted, there will be a loss. For those who are not impacted, there's no loss. So the difference would be, say, with a hurricane that comes through and it doesn't differentiate, it just hits a geographic area. The other difference a bit with a dynamic risk is that people may be able to take advantage of the situation, not so much prosper from the risk, but prosper from opportunities that arise due to the risk. A static risk is present with no change in environment. The risk is constant. Even when everything is going well, some people will suffer. If we look at examples, a dynamic risk may be the newspaper industry. In recent years, paper circulation has fallen greatly. And that's the result of more and more people getting their news online. They don't need the daily newspaper delivered to their door. That's created layoffs, bankruptcies. It also has created, though, opportunities as you see new businesses erupt in online news and online communication. Carbon emissions may be another good example. We see government regulations on fuel and carbon taxes, and that's resulted in some restructuring in the automobile industry. This may negatively affect those who produce Hummers and large trucks, but it gives an opportunity to makers of hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles. In the static, we see bull equity markets, so you have a strong stock market. But even when everything is good in the stock market, you're still going to see people that make bad investments or suffer losses. The same is true in strong economies. Even when unemployment rate is extremely low and everything is booming, you still see some companies fail. Some people get laid off. So that's the difference between dynamic and static. Pure versus speculative risk is another area. Pure risks, they can be fundamental or particular. They can also be dynamic or static. The key with pure risks is that there are only two possible outcomes. You can experience a loss, or there's no change in status. You cannot prosper from a pure risk. On the other hand, a speculative risk provides a third possible outcome, gain. And this is different from what we just described in dynamic. With a dynamic risk, carbon taxes may create losses for gasoline vehicles and larger vehicles. But if you're agile and nimble, you can create a business to take advantage of the carbon emissions taxes and such, hybrids, electrics. But you're taking advantage of the situation. You're not taking advantage of the risk itself. A speculative risk, you actually are involved in the risk. And if we look at our examples, a pure risk we discussed before, earthquakes, car theft, job loss. But a static risk, say buying common shares on the stock market. You buy shares of Apple Computer for $500. A year from now, they might be worth $400, so you experience a loss. They might be worth $500, so there's no change in outcome. Or they may have grown to $700 or $800. That is the third possible outcome, gain. Gambling may be a similar. You go to Vegas, you play blackjack all night, maybe you lose everything, maybe you break even, or maybe you come away at the end of the night a few dollars up. Again, you see gain. Speculative risk is investment risk. And that's what we're going to get into going forward. But to understand the difference between pure risks, which is how most of us view risk in general, and investment risk is key. Because many people only focus on the risk of loss or the downside risk as far as investing goes. You need to appreciate that risk is on both sides. The risk of gain and the risk of loss. So that's what we're going to look at going forward. That concludes today's session on what is risk. We'll look more at risk in future presentations. Thank you for your time today. If you ever wish to discuss your personal wealth management needs, please feel free to visit Wilson Wealth Management or contact me via email or at the telephone number listed. Thank you again. Have yourself a good day.